A lot of Christians are confused about what Jesus means when he says, enter by the narrow gate. I know I was confused for years because different Bible teachers would say different things, but then it hit me. The rest of the Sermon on the Mount explains what Jesus means, and that's when it began to click for me. Here's a hint. Jesus has already mentioned the law and the prophets once before, and I'm going to explain what I mean. So what does it mean to enter by the narrow gate? How do we make sure we've really done this? In this video, we're going to unlock this passage by highlighting 5 key ideas that you can't miss if you want to understand what Jesus means. So let's jump in. For those of you that don't want to wait around till the end, Jesus is saying to enter by God's one ordained way into his kingdom. And it's the way that pushes against man's glory, man's righteousness, and man's wisdom. So we're going to walk through each of these key points, make sense of what Jesus is really saying here. And by the end, we'll understand why Jesus references the law and the prophets once we connect it to his earlier statement in chapter 5 about the law. So stick around for that. And I recommend if you haven't watched the rest of our Matthew series, go watch that. You don't have to, but at least watch the previous teaching. That would be helpful. The first thing to note is that Jesus just ended by saying, how much more will your Father who's in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Boom. Now we're talking about the golden rule. So, in light of this, in light of your Father doing for you what is best and treating you the way that you want to be treated, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. This is the law and the prophets. Why does the law and the prophets get brought into this when it comes to doing to others what we want to be done to us? Number 1, here's the observation that we need to make sure we think about and understand, and it's this. This is exactly what God is doing in chapter 5, verse 45 through 48, when he lets his rain and sunshine come upon the just, the unjust, the wicked, and the good. So we are to imitate God by reflecting that love and grace upon the earth, really, that he pours out upon all people. We're supposed to reflect that from heaven on the earth. This is what verse 11 said, that God is ready to give to those who ask and seek. And this is why in the last verse it talks about our imitation of God's fatherly heart in giving good things that we don't deserve. And his goodness is supposed to cause us to repent and change and not live in self-righteousness and pride and hypocrisy. So we want to be thinking about why the law and the prophets suddenly get brought in after almost 2 chapters of not referencing it. And here's the second observation. This is the heart of the Hebrew Bible. This is the way of life that God has, from the beginning, wanted for humanity, and then Israel as his special nation, and then for his children, is that we would love as he loves us and those who don't deserve his love, which is everyone. Even those who return love with violent hatred and opposition, as we saw with the pigs and the dogs, being violent towards the sacred things you're throwing at them. So this is about doing to others before they do to you. Like, make the choice ahead of time, not to react, but decide ahead of time how you're going to respond in love. My treatment of others will not be based on their actions. It's not going to be a reaction. My treatment of others will be in response to the love of God that we see in the law and the prophets, laid out in the law and the prophets. Now, Jesus says, enter by the narrow gate. And I'd like to suggest that this narrow gate at least involves, if not is referring to, the law and the prophets. For the gate is wide, now we have a different gate. And the way is easy, and we have a way that leads to destruction, right? So we have a gate that leads to a way of life, and the narrow gate leads to a different way of life. Those who enter by it are many. The wide gate and easy way, for the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. This is the way that's being opened up back in verse 7. Jesus said, knock and the door will be opened to you. And so number 3, the narrow gate seems to refer to the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Love from a place of faith and trust in God as our Father. This is not us fulfilling the law to attain righteousness. This is Jesus fulfills the law and the prophets. How do we know that? Because back in chapter 5, verse 17, he said, don't think I've come to abolish the law. I've come to fulfill it. And now, through faith in Jesus, his perfection and righteousness applies to us so that we can walk in his righteousness and in that sense fulfill the law. Not in replacement of Jesus, not in addition to his work, but as a response. I'm going to walk in the way of love now. And so Jesus spoke of that in chapter 5, verse 17, and he's inviting people to walk in his footsteps. This is the way of life that is hard. This is the way of life that people don't want. Many people find the easy way more appealing. And so we're to imitate the behavior and actions of Jesus in faith. Jesus has fulfilled the law for us, so we respond. And part of that involves a different way of life. Jesus is not asking you to fulfill the law by your efforts. That's not what it means to enter by the narrow gate. If Jesus is making any point about entering by the law and the prophets, it's saying, hey, a lot of people are trying to enter this wide gate by their obedience to the law and the prophets. That's what the wide gate represents. Any gate apart from faith in Jesus, who is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, that's what the wide gate is. The narrow gate is very simply faith and trust that Jesus has already fulfilled it for us. So as Romans chapter 8 says, trust in Jesus as your perfect mediator, but we don't fulfill the law on our own or in our own ability to attain righteousness. But once we trust in Jesus, the law of love is now fulfilled in the way that we live. Not just in us by faith, but through our way of life, we are walking in accordance with Jesus and his footsteps. So now that we've fulfilled the law because of Christ's applied righteousness, our lives begin to progressively and increasingly match up with the ways of God, which is the fulfillment of the law and prophets to love. In John 10, verse 1 through 3, Jesus says, enter by the door. And that's the door for the sheep to come into the sheepfold. He's the door, and he's the way to the Father. So if he's the door into the kingdom, then we're to enter by Jesus, who fulfills the law and the prophets. And that kind of faith will lead to this way of life that is difficult, but by the Spirit we're empowered to do it well. So faith is coming to Jesus to bring us in by his sacrifice. Now back to verse 13. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. Not only do we have two gates contrasted, the wide gate and the narrow gate, but we also have two ways of life, the easy way and the hard way. And on top of that, we have two eternal destinies. One is destruction and one is life. And you might say many find the wide gate and the few find the hard one. So now just to tease out one of the next few videos, we're going to look at how this entrance, this narrow gate, actually brings us back to the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3. So make sure you watch that video when I map out the 10 clear parallels, or 11, between this chapter and the Genesis 3 story. And so the wide gate leads to an easy way of life, which doesn't mean everything is bad. Or everything easy is bad. I think some people would go, oh, easy, always bad. No, in this context, what is easy is to trust in my own sense of righteousness and morality and try and fulfill the law and the prophets myself. What's hard, or what makes this gate narrow, is that it's exclusive, but at the same time it's inclusive. It's for all people, but there's only one way into the kingdom, and it's through faith in Jesus, admitting you're not good enough. So it seems to be easy because there's no trouble or opposition, but also because, as we'll see in the next section, with the whole false prophets, the trees and the fruit, what makes this gate narrow, or this way hard to find, few find it, is because there are false prophets who are holding neon glowing signs pointing everyone away from the only way into the kingdom. And so this way of life that's easy is one full of unbelief and self-righteousness and sinful pleasure and a sense of reliance upon me. I'm my own God. And the other way is Jesus has done it all, and I'm nothing without him through faith, right? For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. So it seems as though once you've entered into the kingdom or walked through that gate, that way of life is not without difficulty or struggle. A lot of people think the way is hard because you have to do a lot to make sure you stay on the path that leads to life. No, it's hard because we're going to see false prophets are detouring people from that way and standing against you. And there's a lot of opposition now. The world's against you, your flesh is against you, the kingdom of darkness. So Jesus says this about the rich young ruler in chapter 19. Later in Matthew's gospel, he'll say, "Truly I say to you," so think about this way being hard. He says, "Only with difficulty will a rich person enter the kingdom of heaven." Again, I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. So the last thing to consider is that only few find this narrow gate and hard way that leads to life. So we should be asking why. That's the fourth observation. Why is it only a few? Because in Matthew 23, verse 12, Jesus will tell us explicitly. He'll look at the scribes and Pharisees and he'll say, "You shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would otherwise enter to go in." They're standing as an obstacle, pushing people away to the counterfeit entrances that are wide and easy. And this is going to be important for the next section because false prophets and false teachers are prevalent during the ministry of Jesus. And so this brings us back to verse 7. If you remember, the asking, seeking, and finding, right? Seeking and finding is part of the way we enter. It's not by efforts. It's not faith is a meritorious work. It's there is a desire for what Jesus is offering. And I seek for that by faith. So maybe many don't find this way because false prophets are shutting the door, pointing people the wrong direction. And here's the last observation. We're going to see this whole few and many like this wide gate. Few find this narrow gate and hard way. We'll see this language of few and many later on in the parables of Jesus, specifically the wedding feast parable, where Jesus will say many are called or invited to the feast, but few are actually chosen. Few enter in the right way, properly dressed. And so when Jesus speaks of two gates and two paths, he's also going to talk about two builders at the end of this chapter, the wise man and the foolish man. Each of these analogies represents the same two kinds of people. Those who pursue man's wisdom, glory, and righteousness. Those are the people that enter by the wide gate and the easy way, and they're the foolish people building on the sand. And then you have the other category of people, those who pursue God's wisdom, God's glory, and righteousness through faith in what he's provided, right? So this is all about going through God's ordained, provided way that the law and the prophets point to, not stopping at man's wisdom and settling for man's religion, which negates the entire point of the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible points to Yeshua, points to Jesus as Messiah. And both of these approaches result in two completely different lifestyles, two completely different destinies and pursuits. The entirety of the life becomes evidence of a person's true treasure, their pursuits, and whether or not they've received God's way. So this is going to be the first of a series of analogies that explain the two categories humanity falls into. We saw the two gates, we saw the two paths, and then we're going to see the two trees in the next section. And then finally, at the end of the chapter, we'll see the two builders. So why does Jesus in the next section use trees to represent false teachers and false prophets? And what is the connection between false prophets and these two paths and gates that he just described? I think it's much deeper than most people think, so be sure to watch that video. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.